I would like to introduce you tonight to our presenters. Again, I'm Shaina Overfelt. I'll be the moderator tonight, just fielding questions, helping in the chat, and keeping our presenters on task, if you will. Some of you know these presenters, you know what a job this just might turn out to be. But I'd like to introduce Dr. Harvey Weingarten, Dr. Bruce Horn, Dr. Ben Wall, Dr. Guy Champaign, Kimber Cobb, Dr. Stuart Blumenthal, Pat Connolly Atkins, Kelly Reich, and again, my name is Shaina Overfelt. So, Dr. Weingarten, are you there?
I'm here, Shaina.
Excellent.
And thank you for being our moderator this evening. I look forward to a great program.
Absolutely. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, it's been my pleasure to be the chairman of the CDCA and now the chairman of the CDCA-WREB agency. It really is something that is a great story, and you're going to hear a lot of it tonight. You're going to hear how we came together and the reasons that we've come together. You're going to be able to see the performance data of the 2021 and 2020 dental and dental hygiene exams. You'll hear the story about our new tooth, the Confidant tooth, and the changes and improvements and enhancements we have for the 2022 exam. And then in 2022, the dental hygiene exam, mannequin examination. And finally, at the end of the program, you hear about the ADEX OSCE examinations for dental and dental hygiene. As in any story, we begin with one person making that first move. And it's my pleasure to introduce my new friend, my colleague, Dr. Bruce Horn, who's going to tell us how his first move began a domino effect that allowed us to come together to form the CDCA-WREB organization. Dr. Horn.
Thank you, Harvey. Well, it is a long story, but the short of the story is that not only the pandemic, but our opportunity to work together with other CDCA people over the years allowed us to stay in communication. Phone calls were made, opportunities to work together were discussed, and that led to a greater opening of dialogue between the two groups. We realized that, honestly, we were in tandem, if you will, moving along with both our patient-based simulations and OSCE examinations. And it became apparent that working together in a synergy might be better for all, better for the profession. This merger provides an opportunity for educators to prepare their students to challenge a single nationwide exam, licensure exam, accepted in all states and territories, minus New York and Delaware. It also provides a standardization in administration and content of this new examination that will be beginning in 2023. We've created a board. This transitional board has 18 members. Both organizations merged in a way where we think we have a great working relationship. Well, I know we do. The REB examination specifically will continue in its current format for the year 2022. There's no content or administrative changes. Both the non-patient simulation and the patient-based examination will be offered this year as it was last year. Harvey?
Thank you, Bruce. And I want to, again, thank you for making that first phone call to allow this to come together. It has taken many people, many hours to put together this union. And fortunately, the fruition of which is going to be able to help the state boards. It's going to make it simpler. It's going to make it more efficient. And as a dental educator with the responsibility of the clinics, it's going to help the schools as well, because it allows us the opportunity to just have one exam in our schools as opposed to multiple exams.
I am going to add something real quick from the chat from Bob McNeil. He said, great on both groups for talking to each other to make this happen. We're better together. Absolutely, Dr. McNeil.
Here are my favorite maps of any slide presentation. I always have to demand that these are included. The map on your left is the patient-based ADEX acceptance. And as Dr. Horn had mentioned, we are accepted in all the states that will take an exam. The only two states that are exceptions to the rule are New York with the PGY-1 and Delaware with its own exam. So you can see that from a portability aspect, from an aspect of simplicity, from an aspect of consistency, the ADEX exam is accepted across coast to coast, north to south, as well as in some US territories. The hygiene exam is almost there. We have a few states we're still working on to get the mannequin-based acceptance. And the mannequin-based ADEX acceptance, you'll notice, is all the states with the exclusion of Florida, Wyoming, and Nevada.
And the next slide is where I get to introduce Dr. Ben Wall. Dr. Wall, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much. It's great to be here with this group. So as we continue through this presentation, we want to make sure we're all speaking the same language, so to speak. So we're just going to introduce you. Many of you are maybe familiar with these. We want to make sure everybody is. So we're just going to talk a little bit about some of the acronyms that will be presented here. Obviously, CDCA-WREB, probably very familiar with those. ADEX is the American Board of Dental Examiners. That is the organization that develops the content and criteria of the ADEX exam that is delivered by the CDCA-WREB. And the ADEX exam, there's a dental ADEX exam and a dental hygiene ADEX exam, each of which has different sections or components. The restorative component of the ADEX exam can be administered with a patient-based exam or a mannequin or simulated patient exam. The Competent is the brand of the name brand of the tooth that is used for the mannequin-based ADEX restorative examination. The PTCE and MTCE refers to our hygiene examination, the ADEX hygiene examination, patient-based or mannequin-based of the treatment clinical examinations. There are two OSCEs, one for dental candidates and one for dental hygiene candidates. These are also components of the ADEX examinations. The DSE is the diagnostic skills examination for dental candidates, and the CSCE is the equivalent for the hygiene candidates, the computer simulated clinical examination. CTP is the written OSCE examination that's been developed and administered by WREB. Now we'd like to move to just presenting briefly some of the statistics of the performance by candidates in the 2021 dental class. Eventually we'll move on and give you information for the hygiene as well. This is a comparative analysis of performance on a patient-based exam and a simulated patient-based exam with the Competent for restorative in anterior and posterior, as well as a comparative analysis of the results of the patient and simulated patient examination for the periodontal scaling examination for the ADEX exam. These statistics are continuously being updated as the season continues. There are more exams, and by the end of the year, we'll have more complete statistics to show, but this is where we're at up to this point. I wanted to give a chance to Dr. Horn to talk about the performance and statistics of the WREB exam so far for 2021.
Thank you, Ben. Very briefly, 2019 certainly was the last fully patient-based season. Then we had our pandemic, which has switched us to simulations. For the most part, in 2021, 95% of the candidates we examined participated in a complete simulation clinical licensure exam. Only 5% of those candidates treated patients as part of their pathway for application for initial licensure. Our results are very similar to the independent CDCA results last year. In fact, we found that our restorative examination in simulation was slightly more challenging than the patient examination. We found no statistic difference really in periodontal scaling and root planing on the simulation examination from when we had offered that with the patient. Ben, that's really it from our end. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Horn.
Thank you, Dr. Horn, and thank you, Dr. Wall. I would like to turn it over now to talk about the ADEX confidant tooth. Dr. Champaign, I know you're here. I can see you in the background. So I'm gonna let you take over from here, kind of explaining the confidant and going through the process and images that we're going to present this evening.
Thank you, Shaina. It's really my pleasure to fill you in on briefly on the development of the confidant tooth for those of you who may not be familiar with it, talk about some of the enhancements we've made, and more importantly, tell you how it performed as a mode of testing. Understand that, yes, the confidant is the brand, but it's way beyond that. The confidant is actually a patent pending process on behalf of CDCA-WREB. It is exclusive. No other tooth in the world is made this way. And it was not developed in response to the pandemic. So really this started back in 2017 when state dental boards approached us and said, could we come up with a non-patient alternative, specifically in restorative dentistry? We didn't know if we could. We thought we had an idea of how the manufacturing process could be altered. And over the ensuing 2 years, that's what was done. We started with little blocks. We had to make the enamel hardness the same, the dentin hardness, the character. In other words, will undermined enamel fracture the same way? Does it feel the same? It was finally developed where our educational experts and our private practitioners who had been working with the tooth said it's ready for testing. In 2019, we did a mode effect study. Now, when anyone suggests we should test in a different manner, the standards for testing in education psychology really mandate that you do a mode effect study. Does it perform the same way? Does it find the same things? Not just the pass rate, but are the reasons for passing or more importantly, failing the same? We did a cohort study, 650 candidates across 6 dental schools in the United States, and we are indebted to those dental schools. They were a major contributor to advancing this. Did a high stakes exam, either doing their CODA required competencies or as a qualifier to take the real exam. It was then independently evaluated by ACA Ventures psychometrically, recommended to ADEX, and it was given full approval because of its performance, which I will share with you in just a minute. In fact, the ADEX examination says you can do the anterior or posterior restorations and preparations either on the confidant and only the confidant or a patient. It's been utilized for 2 exam seasons, and we're going to start to share with you right now what that performance looked like. So for 2022, I'm going to first go over some of the enhancements to the tooth. It is continuously evolving. We debrief examiners, faculty, and candidates after we give exams, and we've enhanced the tooth. We've enhanced it for testing purposes on an ongoing basis. On the 2022 upcoming exam season, there will be 8 lesions instead of 3. That adds additional variability. It gives us the option to require the candidate to make a diagnosis from the x-ray. It also changes the restorations that they're going to do throughout any given day and through the exam process. We've also made some enhancements to pulp tissue. So if we look at the next slide, this may be the most important slide I show you, and I'm going to spend the least amount of time. It looks like it's 2 charts. It really isn't. And the point of this is with the confidant tooth, we utilize the exact same criteria and examination process, whether it's a patient or the confidant tooth. Every criteria is evaluated. When the tooth was developed, that was a requirement. That the exam be conducted in the same fashion. The modification process had to be done in the same fashion. We assured dental boards that the examination we were giving would be the same process, whether it was a patient or a confidant. So this really isn't 2 charts in our manual. It's 1 chart. This is for illustration purposes. It's identical. So if you look at the next slide, it doesn't matter whether it's the candidate doing the exam in a sim lab, as you see on the left, but it has to be one that will simulate a chair in the anatomic position, or the graders with the head mounted on a chair. We reproduce the anatomical constraints that the patient would provide so that it is graded and performed by both candidates and examiners in the same fashion Everything but local anesthesia stays the same. So what did we find? What did the Confidant tooth offer? And I think this is significant. So as I talked about, we had to model everything. We wanted to simulate human caries, the disease that we're treating in restorative dentistry. So for any simulation, we didn't want it to be adequate. We wanted it to be great. So like advanced cardiac life support, the reason it's a great simulation, it offers more variability and we can evaluate more things than any one patient might provide. So the Confidant tooth had to provide the panoply, the progression, if you will, of caries, whether it's infected dentin, affected dentin, or sclerotic dentin. So we had frank caries, which was penetrable by an explorer and exhibited the same tug back, the same tactile tug back. We had decalcified dentin, penetratable without tug back. We have sclerotic dentin, which might be stained but not penetrable. We have stained and unstained caries. We had to duplicate the pathway of penetration. So in other words, it would promulgate along the DEJ and how it would promulgate axially. It had to demonstrate the same character as enamel and dentin, as we talked about. It had to be restorable in the same fashion, so it had to be able to be etched and bonded. In fact, we had to assure it met all exam standards. But what we added that enhanced it maybe beyond a patient is variability. So where a patient might provide just a few of these, every Confidant tooth demonstrates all of these clinical dilemmas. Everybody's going to have to differentiate between stained and unstained caries, sclerotic dentin, decalcified dentin. They're going to have to submit modifications to alter their treatment plan. In fact, no two Confidant teeth are the same. In fact, when we evaluated this on our first generation, when there was just one anterior and one posterior lesion, performance did not improve. You can't game it. Every preparation is different. The amount of caries is different. There will be a small percentage of teeth that need no modifications, and there's a small percentage of teeth you're going to have to do an indirect or a direct pulp cap. So we increased the variability. So what did we find? When we gave this over the 2 years, as you'll see, we've looked at what were the reasons for failure. This is the interesting thing. This is the most recent data we have. And if you compare the patient-based exam to the simulated patient exam or the Confidant exam, what do you see that is really interesting here is caries doesn't even rank anymore as a reason for failure on the patient. They're selecting lesions small enough that serendipitously, although they qualify, there is no caries once they've done an acceptable preparation. In fact, if you look at the reason for failures, it's just when they inadvertently have prepped too far without a modification. In our simulated patient, we have far more discriminations, although the restoration performs, and on this slide, both in patient and simulated patient, almost identically. We have the same reasons for failure, whether it's a patient or simulated patient. It's the preparation that tells the story. The top chart just very briefly shows that the number of critical deficiencies that we see in the simulated patient, because we have more clinical dilemmas, it is a more challenging lesion we are presenting, but uniform across the candidates. We find more critical deficiencies and more candidates have multiple critical deficiencies. And this is an analysis that was performed by psychometricians ACS Venture and was presented just last week. So you're seeing the most current data for this year's generation of the Confidant tooth.
Now, everyone, I just want everyone to realize that I am most proud of the tooth, but I'm even more proud of the fact that an oral surgeon could explain it to us.
And I'm using words, I don't know what they mean, but I hope I sound good. Anyway, so the Typodon itself that we use for the perio is not a Confidant Typodon, so I just want to emphasize that. Now, this is not the same Typodon that Pat will be discussing for dental hygiene later. The occupational analysis for dentistry is different. We only have two critical deficiencies, leaving calculus or tissue trauma. You can see they perform identically, whether it's a patient or a simulated patient. it really doesn't matter. The periodontal scaling exam performs the same way. Now, as you know, this is an optional exam. It was an optional exam historically with both ADEX and WREB. It remains an optional exam in the ADEX exam, but we do offer it for states that require it. So what did we find? We find caries remaining, like you'll see here along the DEJ, or we'll see the other errors that we see. We'll see adjacent tooth damage, as you see here. We'll see unidentified or exposures that were unrecognized, as you see in this slide. We'll find inadvertent overextension and overpreparation. This candidate went right through to the facial. In fact, we'll find all of the treatment errors that we normally find. Caries remaining, open context, voids, marginal excess, overpreparation, wrong tooth, wrong surface, but we find them more commonly, and we find more of them because the challenges, the clinical dilemmas that we can give to the candidate are more significant. But you've got to ask, after we presented all of this, does it matter? Does it matter that we find these things? We're talking about a psychomotor exam. Is it important? Does it matter? Well, every dental board in the country now is being approached by the ADA and the Joint Commission saying that psychomotor skills, even though dentistry is almost exclusively a surgical profession, it's not necessary to assess psychomotor skills. In fact, the line that the ADA has used dental boards is the brain tells the hands what to do. And interesting, the pandemic that Bruce referred to earlier that changed everything mandated that we test that hypothesis. So what you're going to see is the testing of the ADA premise. And so all of the work I'm going to show you as a result of exams are of dentists. These are not dental students. They all graduated dental school. Some of them are PGY1, but most of them are graduate dental students because they couldn't be tested while they were in dental school. They completed all their code of competencies. They passed the OSCE. They passed the national boards. They achieved every milestone that the ADA Joint Commission says that is required to receive a license. Nothing else was required according to the ADA. Well, I'm going to show you some work. You tell me. Now, we see caries remaining. I just showed you that earlier. We found that, of course. This is a dentist who left caries along the DEJ, but that's not the only thing we found. So if you look at the next slide, and we'll pause here for just a minute, this was a preparation submitted by a dentist. There were no modification requests. The dark reddish brown area is pulp. If you look toward the middle of the tooth, that's the axial wall, almost at the midline of the tooth. Without any modifications, this was thought to be an adequate preparation. We see that not just on this. If you look at the next slide, you're going to see this preparation. Now, why does it look so odd? If you look on the gingival floor, there's no enamel at all. If you look closely, that's 2 or 3 millimeters subcrestal bone. They just prepped that all the way down onto the root surface. There is no enamel left. We don't put cementum on the root surface because you're not supposed to be there. The axial wall is almost on the midline. It's hard to see in that slide. It's clearer on mine, but this was an outline that a practicing dentist submitted with no modifications. They thought this was a prep ready to be graded. This is another preparation. I was at this exam. This candidate was a PGY1 dentist. They did not run out of time. Now, admittedly, the caries is gone on the interproximal. The caries, I can assure you, is gone inside the prep, but they thought this was ready to be graded. This was what they should turn in. Now, I can tell you that if we played with that enamel bridge or whatever you want to call that, it would have fractured off. But I was there at this exam. This candidate decided they're ready to be graded. Now, I don't know. They passed the OSCE, they passed the national board, they graduated dental school, they did their code of competencies. And this was the restoration that all of that produced. Now, hopefully my brain's going to tell my hands a little bit better what to do if that's the actual premise. If we look at the next slide that I'm going to show you, and I'm going to pause here just a minute, I'm going to show you quite a few restorations. Why am I going to focus on restorations? Because this is the ultimate test of the ADA premise. Because unlike a preparation that once you've over-prepared, it's irreversible. You can't put it back. You're stuck with that. Now, it doesn't apply to that class, whatever it was on the anterior tooth, but it does apply to this restoration. A candidate, if they're not satisfied with the restoration, can remove it and replace it. They can do that as many times as they like. They do not need our permission to do that. They can use their judgment and say, I'm going to redo this until I develop the restoration, place the restoration, refine the restoration that I want to be evaluated on. And this is what a dentist submitted. And if you look on the next slide, this is also what a dentist submitted. Yes, there's contact, but I think that we all understood no matter what, this is unacceptable. If you look at the next slide, you're going to see the same thing. And this continues on the next slide. So this is an anterior restoration. They can see it just as well as we can. And if you look at it from the lingual, it's even worse. If you look at the next slide, we see just a continuing pattern. What is the reason that somebody did not refine this? The only thing I can assume is they didn't have the hand skills to do it. They had to know. A layperson would know. And we see this pattern again. Here's another restoration and another restoration. It's not exclusive though, what we see to restorative. If we move on, this was a preparation done by a dentist. The preparation is bad enough, but there's also adjacent tooth damage. And if you look at the next slide, which is of a anterior preparation, again, I don't know what principles, but I think it's important that we evaluate, can they take their judgment and translate it into appropriate clinical care? Not just do they know it. Same thing on this 3-unit bridge. I'm showing you both a buccal and lingual view, and you can see again, there's anterior adjacent tooth damage. It's not exclusive here either. If we go to the next slide, you're going to see, we see it in endodontics as well. So this is a perforation. You see the angle, they had to use that handpiece. They did not reach any of the canals. They perforated right through. Even the elementary, this was an access opening that was done by a dentist, not a dental student, as was this next access opening. So somebody thought that this was at least the best they can do hand skill wise to develop the access opening to do conservative endodontics. So is it important that we identified it? Does the psychomotor skills, is that something we should look at? For me, the work speaks for itself. A psychomotor exam is required because we see dentists and dental students perform that way. In other words, should we eliminate the flight test for pilots? Just have them take the written test. Maybe that's a possibility. Is the performance part of CPR and advanced cardiac life support unnecessary? Maybe just a cognitive exam. But the bigger question for me is not this theoretical question. The question is not just should any of those dentists be granted a license, but would you let them treat your family, no matter how good they performed on an OSCE? Look, it's very appealing to believe the argument that the brain tells your hands what to do. In fact, when I gave up golf, I didn't realize that the time on the course was wasted. I should have had more time in the library studying. That's what I needed, and that's what I obviously didn't have. But we're scientists. And so when someone asserts to you that you can replace the psychomotor hand skills exam, the question should always be from scientists, show us the meta-analysis, show us the evidence-based review that in the literature that any cognitive exam correlates or predicts hand skills. I've yet to see it. Now, Bruce has been quiet, and I'm going to ask him because very few people have had as much experience and background developing cognitive exams as Bruce, both on the Joint Commission and, of course, for the CTP. Bruce, what are your thoughts on a cognitive standalone exam?
Thank you, Guy. So, you know, we ultimately provide independent assessment results for the state dental boards to look at as a pathway to initial licensure for your students that become candidates and then eventually become our colleagues. I'm of the opinion that, you know, the skill, knowledge, and ability of a candidate that's evaluated but not married to a psychomotor skill assessment of some kind is an incomplete assessment. We too at REB have many slides of candidates that we use in training and teaching and scoring and calibration that make us scratch our heads and wonder, did they run out of time? No, a lot of times candidates have sufficient time. That is their perception of acceptable work, regardless of the criteria that's published or the number of resources we provide to them to prepare. I think that an opportunity to provide a state dental board with information that allows them to decide that a candidate can safely practice dentistry, independent clinical practice, is something that we shoot for. And I don't know how that can be done without a psychomotor assessment. So I agree with that, and I'm concerned.
And so in summary, what I think we want to leave you with is, I think that it is a tough road to try to convince dentists a psychomotor exam isn't necessary. We all know that we are a surgical discipline. With the competent, with the variability, with the fidelity, with the simulation it can provide of a human tooth, the shortcomings or perceived shortcomings of a patient-based exam can be overcome. And there's really no argument once a patient does not have to participate in the exam on why we should not do a psychomotor evaluation. What is the argument that that we should not be doing it? If we see work like this, I think it's incumbent for us. And I think these really apply for testing across the board in dentistry and dental hygiene. And with that, I'll turn it back to Shaina.
Thank you, Dr. Champaign. Thank you, Dr. Horn. We are now going to move into dental hygiene, one of my favorite topics. And I'm going to roll this right on over to Kimber Cobb, one of my favorite dental hygienists, to talk about acceptance right now in the dental hygiene community based upon the mannequin and patient-based acceptance. Kimber, are you there?
I am. Good evening, and thank you all so much for being here. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to share our historic and recent updates. And what you're going to be seeing first is our patient-based acceptance map. Please note that these maps that we're showing you are available on the CDCA website, and we do our best to keep them updated on a regular basis. So if any of you that are involved or on your state boards, any administrators we have with us tonight, please reach out, keep us updated for on-the-fly changes. I know a lot of you are considering many options as we move forward with this new paradigm. So we're happy to answer questions and be a resource. This is our current patient-based exam acceptance. And as you can see, it's widely accepted across the country. Mannequin-based, we continue to monitor and stay in touch with our state boards. Currently, there have been some executive orders that have ended, and so we have 38 states that accept our mannequin or simulated patient examinations right now. And then Ms. Pat Connolly-Atkins is going to go through our enhancements for 2022. We've made some significant progression from our first iteration to our third. We're excited about where we've landed. So I'll turn it back over to Shaina, and we're going to give you some data on the performance of our exams, and then go through the enhancements mentioned here.
Thanks, Kimber. Dr. Blumenthal. We'll give you a minute to unmute, and then I'll let you go over these statistics for 2021 so far.
Yes, I'd like to briefly share with you our data for our 2021 candidates. our computer simulated exam, our OSCE, has remained a relatively constant, at a constant level. The pass rate is comparable for the past 5 years. The patient treatment clinical exam in 2021, though it only accounted for 5% of our candidates, had a similar pass rate to years prior. And as you can see, the mannequin treatment clinical exam performed this year very comparably with the patient clinical exam.
Thank you, Dr. Blumenthal. Through this merger, of course, we've had opportunities to make new friends. One of those is for me, Miss Kelly Reich. Hey, Kelly, how are you?
I'm great, Shaina. Thank you. Well, I wanted to just talk a little bit about dental hygiene as well. Dr. Horn also presented the statistics for dental. And, you know, obviously 2020 was a hard year, difficult year for all of us. We were only able to administer a very limited amount of mannequin exams, but to date, 2021, we've actually administered 19 mannequin examinations. So we have a great pool and a lot of statistics to really show and influence and make us understand that, you know, the comparison between the patient-based and the simulation exam is very comparable. And not only just having a more standardized examination, I think we're very similar to what the information that Pat is going to present to everybody as well concerning the mannequin exam. So just another, you know, statistic to show that the simulation exam is a very comparable examination to the patient-based.
Thanks, Kelly, so much. Those of you who have watched kind of the CDCA website for some time have seen that the Pat, we lovingly refer to as the Pat and Shaina show. So Pat, I'm going to let you take over here and talk about these enhancements in the first, second, and third generation of the ADEX MTCE.
Thank you to everybody for tuning in tonight. We've had the pleasure of talking about these enhancements for many of you at your state board meetings, but it's I'm glad that so many of you are on tonight. The goal in developing the MTCE, or our mannequin exam, was for us to mimic or simulate the patient exam. Just as Guy, Bruce, Kelly, we're all saying the same thing. And to do that, we needed to have a good product. And so that's where we started back in 2020 with our first product, our Generation 1. That was our 2020 exam. And the statistics that you're receiving tonight are the result of our second generation, our 2021 exam. And the enhancements that were made between our first and our second generation is that we increased the number of surfaces of calculus on the typodon itself. Each candidate scale had more surfaces to scale. They had the quality of the calculus was better. And as you know, it's with calculus, it's all about the feel. It's the bulk, it's the grit, it's what that explorer feels like on the tooth. And it took a while to get there. And it was like, yay, we are there. We really feel it's a great simulation to patient calculus. So we were able to do that, make one exam. So the quality was enhanced, the texture of the calculus was enhanced. The calculus was a more natural color. It did simulate a patient, and I think our biggest improvement for 2021 was the hardness of the root surface. In 2020, it was not as hard, not as much of a simulation, but in 2021, it stood up to ultrasonic scaling and hand scaling. So it was a much harder root surface. So we have a customized product based on the criteria that we have been working on for this 2021 input. Because of these improvements, we do see the scores that Stuart Blumenthal shared with you that our performance by the candidates utilizing this improved product is close to and simulates the performance of candidates who worked on patients. So we've had Generation 1, we've had Generation 2, and now we're really excited about Generation 3, which is going to be our 2022 exam. Our our progress in 2021 was huge. So I would say our third generation, we are really finally at that tweaking stage, just getting it to be exactly how we want it. The color, we've made another improvement in the color, and now it's just really, if there's such a thing as a natural calculus color, we do have it. The quality and the texture, again, is improved. It's spot on. It really does feel like you are scaling a patient. And we've now been able to, when I say tweak, we've been able to select the locations of where we're putting deposits and the size of those deposits so that they really do reflect the size and location that you might see on a patient. Previously, we were glad to have the calculus in the mouth. Now we're really having the position of the calculus be in those places where you're more apt to see it on a patient.
I do have a question, and I'm going to, Kimber, if I can send this question to you. One of the experiences coming back was, and this is actually 2 models ago, so 2019 model, that the first mandibular molars were easily removed from the arch. That was really addressed in this 2021 model. Can you elaborate on that for me just a little bit?
Yeah, sure. This that was an issue with some of the molars and even some premolars. So what the vendor has done is increased the security of those teeth. And for 2021, other than one minor incident, we've seen no issue with the teeth popping out or being an issue for candidates. So that was another enhancement that we identified moving from generation 1 to generation 2.
And that was really in a manufacturing process. You know, it
Correct.
really wasn't so much about what we had chosen. It was just what the manufacturer could provide. And once they realized they had an error, they manufacturally fixed it.
Very, very quickly. So we didn't see that continue through later iterations. And when we initially tested our 2021 version, that was no longer an issue.
Thank you so much, Kimber. So the next thing we want to talk about, which is the OSCE exam. OSCE is back to the acronyms, but one that seems to be a hot topic right now. So I'd like to, both our dental and dental hygiene exams have an OSCE with them. So I would like to turn to you, Dr. Champaign, to talk about quickly the DSE OSCE from the dental perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Shaina. You know, there has been no debate throughout our history whether an OSCE is required. What we have to test is all of the knowledge, skills, and judgments that make the cut score on the occupational analysis. And the OSCE gives us the opportunity to test judgment and knowledge beyond the reach of our psychomotor exam. So we have representative skill sets that we test on psychomotor, but the OSCE tests judgment and cognitive ability. It's always been to give a complete exam, you need both. It doesn't matter how good you are at performing something if the patient doesn't need it. And your judgment, of course, is critical in allowing you to make decisions. So we've always included for over 50 years, both components of the exam. There's never been a debate internally. Our exam is always focused on strictly clinical dilemmas. There is no recall, no basic standalone knowledge.
And Dr. Horn, you guys also have an OSCE in your CTP. Can you go a little bit elaborate into that for us as well?
Yes, thank you, Shaina. So our OSCE is entitled Comprehensive Treatment Planning. Our OSCE was always intended to complement our skills assessment procedures. Our OSCE was never intended as a standalone examination. It, as you know, it includes the evaluation of patient cases, patient materials. It is a cognitive assessment. And like Guy mentioned, all of the questions and treatment plans that are derived by the candidates relate to patient materials. There are no, as he mentioned, standalone questions that aren't connected to either a periodontal chart, a radiographic analysis, or an intraoral photograph. So it is an essential assessment. we too have always had a OSCE assessment, and again, to repeat, as a complement to our skills assessments in the other procedural areas that we test. Shaina?
Thank you, Dr. Horn. Now, I would also like to focus that the hygiene exam also has its own OSCE exam. Pat, I'm going to come back to you, see if that internet connection is a little better.
Okay, is it? I hope that it is. It's ditto Guy and ditto Bruce as far as the hygiene exam too. We've always believed in the importance of an OSCE exam as a complement to the patient exam and continued to the mannequin exam. Based on our occupational analysis, that's the content of the exam. Our alternative item types make the testing procedure of cognitive skills, it brings it to the next level. And it's a we feel a very, very important part of the dental hygiene examination for dental hygiene practice for the entering candidate.
So I'm going to put a question forth here, Pat. Kelly, please keep this question in mind because I'd like for you to answer it too when you talk about the CDCA-WREB OSCE from your mannequin dental hygiene exam as well. Pat, the question is, and we hear this often, what about those who say that the OSCE is just a repetition of the national board?
Okay, and we do hear that all of the time, and it's easy for us to say it isn't. First of all, it's so clinically based. It tests entry-level skills, and it is all clinical. The slides that are there are all clinical situations. Again, they're based on, either whether it be radiographs or other interpretive skills. I would say that it is not as wide, the subject matter is not as wide as national boards. It is focused on the skills the entry-level skills necessary for dental hygiene. We did have an educator, and one of and some of these state board members may have heard her, who took our OSCE exam and also had taken national boards. And she just said that how much of a difference it was, and that the clinical focus of the OSCE is different, and they're definitely testing different skill sets than the national boards are. So 2 examinations, both may be taken on a computer, but content and methodology of testing very different.
And Pat, can you quickly touch on the development of the OSCE? It is developed. Who is the creators of the CSE OSCE?
Yeah, I think a real important, and thank you for asking me this question. The CSE OSCE is developed by CDCA. It has developed it, and it's mostly by a team of hygienists. There is a periodontist also on the team, and with developing alternative item types, but it is something that is based on the occupational analysis, which ADEX does. We have control over the content of what is in the OSCE. We have control. We know, we've seen the occupational analysis, and we can place the topics that are responded to by the occupational analysis. We have the control of it to be able to have that exam reflect what is current. So it is predominantly written by hygienists.
Thank you, Pat. Kelly, I'm going to turn this over to you to talk about a little bit for us.
Well, I think Pat answered your question very well. And, I don't have a lot to say about that to add to that, but I do think it's interesting that 2 separate testing agencies really felt the relevance of the importance of having some type of, testing entity besides just the simulation exam, that we felt like there needed to be an adjunct component to that, testing those critical thinking skills that we don't necessarily are able to test on a simulation exam. So we also have heard that, it's a replica of national boards. I don't believe that. I think national boards is an accumulation and a testing knowledge of everything you've learned in those 2 years through dental hygiene. I think what we're trying to get is we're trying to prepare and look at those entry-level candidates. Are they able to practice in a safe manner, and targeting that information and the things that we ask on that test specifically to those skills. So very well put, Pat. But yes, I also think it's just, you know, as long as you have an adjunct and something that you can use as well as the simulation exam, I think it's just a better information and better things to give to the state boards for initial licensure.
Well, what an excellent conversation based around the OSCE. If those of you have additional questions about the OSCE exam offered by the CDCA-WREB, of course, we'll have you to come talk to your state boards upon invitation. But lastly, Dr. Blumenthal, I'd like to come to you because this actually has been a question within the chat tonight about some of the exams that CDCA offered and REB offered that now under the umbrella of CDCA-WREB will continue to exist. So can you talk about these exams and their availability?
Yes, thank you, Shaina, and I'm unmuted this time. The CDCA-WREB will continue to develop and administer these products. We currently give a dental therapy exam, which has both a clinical component as well as didactic components. We deliver an EFTA exam that has a clinical component as well as a didactic component. And we deliver a restorative simulated exam, which is a clinical exam for dental hygienists. CDCA-WREB will continue to give a clinical local anesthesia exam. And we also give a number of didactic exams. All of these exams are available at national test centers throughout the country. We give a sedation anesthesia competency exam for dentists, a nitrous oxide didactic exam for hygienists, a local anesthesia exam, a written exam for hygienists, and we administer a Florida laws and rules exam for both dentists and dental hygienists.
Thank you, Dr. Blumenthal. And we do know we host a state board educators meeting in January as well at our annual meeting conference. And one of the topics that constantly has come up is dental therapy, EFTAs, and how you all are working through writing rules and trying to make accommodations for these new professions or testing these skills within this organization. So the CDCA-WREB is happy to help promote whatever that is that your state board may need. We can customize these products to meet the needs of your state board. So please know that they are available to you and an option that we are happy to provide. So to my panel, I do have some questions in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and start with one about Confidant, Dr. Champaign. And the question is, does the Confidant tooth have an unsound demineralized enamel feature?
That's a great question. The bottom line really on the Confidant and the features that we can include in it is based on manufacturing limitations. It's a very difficult tooth to produce, and our production partner, Accidental manufacturing partner, has really, we've taxed their ability to produce this tooth, and we are at the limit. There are a lot of features we are going to add going forward. We looked at the features which were made licensure decisions. So that was the first thing. And we think we've included all of those, but we can create a lesion of any size, any extent, any place we want. It's just we need the lead time and the production capacity to do that. So things like decalcified enamel around a lesion, those are enhancements we are going to add in the future. The reason we didn't put it in right away is because on the patient-based exam, candidates were told to try not to select those teeth. So that wasn't a feature we felt was of primary importance to include right now.
So we do know that we are coming up. We want to be respectful. We said this was going to be an hour. We started about 5 minutes after the hour. So I'm going to go ahead. I've got a few more questions in the chat. So please stay with us as long as possible. But we thank you. If you happen to be wanting to log off, we want to thank you for joining us tonight as well. Dr. Champaign, the next question I have in the chat, and I'm just going to read it verbatim here. Are medical surgeons required to demonstrate their psychomotor skills prior to obtaining a medical license? If not, why not? And if yes, how's that done?
That is a great question. It's the number one question that I get. Being an OMS, of course, I was trained in both sides of that discipline. The answer is a resounding yes, but far different than what most people contemplate. So when you look at any system of licensure, you got to look at it completely. It's built on certain requirements. So ours assumes you have an accredited dental education and you've done certain other things. The medical licensure process is very different from dentistry. So there are three parts to the medical licensing examination given at different times. One is after your first year of residency. That is an independent evaluation of your skills done by somebody independent of your medical school. But more importantly, to keep privileges in a hospital, you have to be board certified and recertified. So there's continued competency. Every patient you bring in is an exam. Every patient I brought in, 100% of them were evaluated for outcomes. It's a Joint Commission requirement to have Joint Commission certification. Everyone had an audience. My privileges could be altered or suspended by any one patient. It is an ongoing, lifelong test with continued, as I said, with board certification level, which is not entry-level licensure and recertification. Dentistry has none of those safeguards. There is only one independent look ever at what a dentist or dental hygienist does, and that's by a third-party licensure exam. Residency evaluations, as you know, are pyramids. You do not advance automatically. It is pared down. And to get through that R1 process, that first year of residency, takes a group of people evaluating your skills on an ongoing basis. But it doesn't end there, and that's what's significant. It goes throughout your entire career. Otherwise, you cannot maintain hospital privileges. And if your skills deteriorate, you lose or those privileges get altered.
And Dr. Champaign, can I ask you about perio real quick? Since the perio portion of the exam is optional, does the OSCE cover clinical judgment and cognitive ability of the perio treatment?
Another great question. So no matter whose occupational analysis you look at, almost for the last 18 years, if it's refined, what dentists do is evaluate a patient's prognosis, current clinical status, etc. They don't perform the scaling. They refer that primarily to the professionals who do that the best, dental hygienists. So our OSCE is so heavily weighted on perio evaluation throughout all the disciplines of dentistry. You cannot pass it if you don't pass the perio section. You won't pass the OSCE. And one final little comment. There was a question. Is the dental hygiene OSCE different than the national boards? We have real world evidence. So in the state of Maryland, for at least the last 40 years, every dentist and every dental hygienist, even if you get a license by credentials, is required to take the OSCE. With your distance from graduation from dental school or dental hygiene school, your performance improves on our OSCE. If you look at the performance on the national boards, it deteriorates rapidly. They perform very differently because the focus of those exams are different and who writes them are different. So there are practitioners who mainly construct the OSCEs, and that makes all the difference in the world. But how it's psychometrically underpinned, we know the dental hygiene OSCE performs very differently than the national boards.
Thank you, Dr. Champaign. Kimber, I'm going to come to you. It's the last question I have in the chat at the moment, but it does pertain to the dental hygiene OSCE. And the question is, will the OSCE be based on the CDCA or the WREB as two separate entities, or will it be a combination exam? Will a combination exam be developed?
So as time progresses, of course, it will be a combined exam. All the WREB examiners will actively participate within the exam development construct, both for ADEX and any of the administration with CDCA. So this next transition year will occur, and then going forward, absolutely. We welcome those SMEs, subject matter experts, and dental hygienists and dentists who have inherently been involved directly with our ADEX product, but that is the plan beginning 2023. So we look forward to welcoming their expertise as we have even putting our current both agencies together. So
thanks, Kimber. I do think it is important to look, as you look at the screen and see the wealth of knowledge that's sitting in front of you. We have just from Dr. Horn, Dr. Champaign, Pat, Kimber, Kelly. You can't see them there in the background, but we have Beth Cole and Alex Vandiver all here, right, participating in this call tonight. So the enhancements, if you will, of just the knowledge base across both agencies is outstanding and something that's not replicated anywhere else. So to you all, as our presenters, thank you for being here. To you all here in the here with us this evening, I think Dr. Harvey Weingarten would like to say a few closing words before we depart. Dr. Weingarten?
Thank you, Shaina, and I'd like to thank all the participants, my co-presenters this evening, for their expertise. As everyone can see, it's the best of both worlds coming together. And so to each and every one of you, the presenters, Shaina, Stephanie, we thank you. If you have any additional questions, feel free to contact the home office, contact our Chief Executive Officer, Alex Vandiver, or Beth Cole, our Chief Operating Officer. We thank you for your participation, and we look forward to working with you as we go down this path together. Good evening.